So obviously
Okay.
it's been a while since our last small cap picks live spaces, Mike, and there's been lots of news flow over the last few months. So we'll start with that. We've had a significant JORC resource upgrade by some 168%. A DFS reoptimization with an MPV increase of 15% to 1.25 billion, and projected lifetime free cash flow more than doubling to 4.47 billion. So these are fantastic numbers. And then obviously news recently that Blencowe have secured its site for the proposed SPG facility. Do you want to touch on these first, Mike, and tell us how they impact and further de-risk the project?
Yeah, let's start with the JORC resource. I mean, we had a drilling program set out as part of the DFS, and that was part of our funding from the Development Finance Corporation. So we had to honour that, and we did about 7,000 meters again, which took us up to about 22,000 in total. And it's been very, very successful in all ways and shapes and form. The drilling that we've done has been incredibly successful, and it's added a lot of value, which is obviously what we're looking to do. And very cost effectively, I might add, because I think it was done at under $10 a ton. So the drilling has been great. I don't think we're necessarily going to do any more drilling right now. I think what we need to do is focus on getting this thing up and running. But the reality is, with a small amount of additional drilling, we can add further reserves. And if the market demand starts to really pick up, as we think it may in the future, then we're very well positioned to be able to bring those new resources and tap them into new reserves. So that's the drilling.
Yep.
The DFS reoptimization, obviously, an excellent result. I think we've got constant work in progress happening on many different fronts. And we felt that, we got to a point where we thought we've got a lot more happening in this downstream beneficiation space than we originally thought. And that's definitely slanting the numbers favorably. And there was a lot of work that was being done on other things as well, in terms of costs, in terms of OPEX and CAPEX, in terms of everything. So we felt that it made sense to reoptimize. And look, at the end of the day, another great result. But, these things are only numbers on a spreadsheet until you get out there and you actually deliver the mine and start producing and get towards delivering those sort of numbers. So, whilst we've been very happy with what we've seen, I think there's the next step is obviously to move into production. And then the downstream site, we've had our eye on a couple of sites over the last 12 months, probably even longer. It's very important that we pick the right site, because we need to be adjacent or very close to a substation. It's going to be an energy intensive business. And, we initially had another site which we wanted. Unfortunately, we couldn't get. The party that owns it didn't want to sell. But we picked up a great location near to the town of Gulu, which is very good for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's not very far from Orom Cross to move concentrate across there. And secondly, when the standard gauge rail line finally gets completed all the way through past the border where it sits at the moment, it's going to have a spur line that goes up to Gulu. So we'll be able to put end product onto the rail line in the next couple of years when that's done, and take it all the way to market. So I think it's a great result. And, we've picked it up for, I think, $70,000. So it's a very, very low cost. And we've got an option over it at the moment. We've just got to get the environmental approvals done, and then it'll be obviously going forward into first stage P1 production to put a spheronization facility in there as part of P1 going forward. So, very happy with that work that's going on in parallel. There's a lot of other work going on, and I guess you're going to touch on that in some of the other questions. But in those particular instances, those three, we've had some great success.
Yeah, excellent. So the DFS in particular then shows some, very large gains as a result of reworking the strategy to, include or consider more of the downstream beneficiation. Can you explain what this means and how this differentiates Orom Cross from other graphite projects?
Yeah, I think for a start, doing downstream beneficiation differentiates us, because not many of our peers seem to think that that's something they want to do. And I get it. I mean, it involves taking on board a whole new processing angle that is perhaps outside of some of the miners' most comfortable zone. But we've been analysing this graphite market for a long time, and the graphite miners that just want to produce a concentrate, and particularly those that just want to sell it into China, they don't make much profit, if any profit at all. In the case of Syrah Resources, they don't make profit. So it's a difficult business. It's a low margin business. We've always believed that downstream processing had a lot of value. And as we've sought to value add more through this whole DFS process, and that's not just in terms of beneficiation, but in terms of some of the stuff we can do on micronization, on the industrial diamonds, etc. We believe that the big value sits there. It shows in the numbers. You take a small flake concentrate and you can sell it for $500-600 a ton, or you can take it into a first stage of beneficiation to spherinize, and suddenly it's $3,000 a ton. Then you purify it as well, and suddenly it's $4,000-5,000 a ton, and ultimately you coat it, it can go up to $10,000 a ton. So somebody's making a lot of money, and those are the people that are obviously worked that beneficiation for a very long time. So we recognize that we've got a lot of work to do to get up that particular curve, but we think we can do it. The more that we analyze it, the more that we go and see these plants as they're running, the more that we understand what the processes really look like, we're getting more comfortable with how to do that. And in particular circumstances where there's stuff we can't do, we've got relationships with people like AET, Alchemia, and others that are pretty smart and will be able to help us. So we are going to focus as much as we can to put as much downstream beneficiation and value adding into our overall mix. And I think that re-optimized DFS was all about, we had X percentage that we could do when we completed the study in December. We've now got 2X that we can do, by the middle of this year when we re-optimized. And I think by the time we get to actually doing it, we could be at 3 or 4X, because we're just going to, be able to learn and add more off-takers and add more, particularly if the rest of the market is not going to do this. So it's really all about that. There were other things, of course, that came into play with that re-optimization at all. I don't want to say it's all just one thing, but the part that's made the biggest difference is downstream beneficiation. And that's, something we're going to focus on in the future.
Yeah. Okay. You touched on it there, but the graphite market itself is not very transparent. So, investors or potential investors don't really understand it, or very easily, as much as something like, say, the copper spot market or gold spot. We see see the prices daily. But what are your thoughts on the graphite market at the moment, and any sort of changes that might be happening, to highlight a shift away from China's dominance, which we've seen what seems forever, basically, or at least the last few decades?
Okay, there's two questions there. One is on pricing and what it looks like, and the other one is on the market. So let me touch on the market first.
Yeah.
For the last 25-30 years, it's been totally dominated by China. And to put it into perspective, if my peer sitting in China trying to do what I'm doing today was to try and start up a graphite mine, the government would come along and say, here's $200 million, go and build it. We don't especially care if you make a profit or not, but please try not to make a loss, because it's going to burn some more money out of our pocket. But really what we want from you is the end product. And off they go. And because they get given that money and they don't have to compete in a commercial sense to be profitable, they can keep the prices nice and low. And by keeping the prices low, they keep every Western or non-Chinese mine out of the market. And that's what they've done. Incredibly successfully, because they control this market. And I think it's up to 98% purified is done in China, and probably about 75 to 80 of the concentrate. So what's changed is that the Western market has woken up to the fact that, yes, it can still buy graphite products from China. They have been doing for a long time, and they will still continue to sell them to the Western markets. But there's a different play in progress, and that's all about geopolitics. We've seen China and President Xi decide that he wants to turn off the taps or threat to do so. There's big export control on graphite products in China right now. It's in play as we speak. It's very, very difficult for anyone in China to get any products out to do with graphite, and I think it's going to get worse. And so Western markets over the last 18 months or so, since Trump came into the White House, have been working very hard to try and break that critical mineral dependence, in particular for graphite, obviously other things as well, but in graphite to break it and try and create, I guess, a non-Chinese bubble, as I call it, where non-Chinese producers or miners can deliver products and the Western markets can buy it, as opposed to having to source anything from China, which, creates this problem, or certainly a potential problem at any stage. So that dynamic has created a big shift, where Western markets and Western off-takers are prepared, certainly in our case. Now, I don't know how much of that's to do with the geopolitics or how much is to do with the fact that we've got very high quality end products that they like. But I guess it's a combination of both. And we're seeing Western off-takers say to us, yes, we want to buy non-Chinese product. We specifically will pay more for that. And, we want to build, we can see, because you're not talking about off-take contracts that are 1 year, they tend to be 5 years, and you can see a growth pattern that's showing some big numbers evolving from that initial status. So I think the huge dynamic at play right now is if the Western markets decide that they don't want to buy from China, and they want to source their product from non-Chinese mines, then obviously there's a huge demand on the horizon. And it's near-term horizon, by the way, because there's some pretty big tenders out there right now with some pretty big players that are talking about some large numbers to be sourced outside of China in the near future. So I guess the opportunity is for somebody, which we hope will be us, to be in production soon with high-quality product, specifically focusing on those non-Chinese off-takers, because the Chinese pay low prices because they want to low ball and keep the market to themselves. Fine. If we can avoid sending any product at all into China, that would be first prize for us, and obviously looking to sell it into better markets that pay better. And ultimately, we can develop those relationships. So I think that's the dynamic at play. And if there are very few new graphite mines coming into production, it's going to create a huge opportunity for those that do, because the Western off-takers will be scrambling to try and fill their buckets with those that come into play. So that's a great macro scenario for us. And as I say, we're seeing it evolve in front of our face with some of the tenders, and just some of the off-take relationships that we're building. In terms of pricing, the other part of your question, it's a very interesting question, and it's one I get asked all the time. People say, well, what price are you selling your graphite? And I say, look, we're going to be selling, 10 different products into 10 different off-takers in 10 different markets at 10 different prices, ranging from, $600-700 a ton to $6,000 or $7,000 per ton. And so you kind of have to evolve your lines, whether it be large flake or small flake. Large flake is probably easier to explain because it's just going out as a concentrate, although some of it will be working through into purified products, expandables, etc. So large flake is easier to sell because it's in short demand, in short supply, and we can get good prices for the concentrate. But the small flake concentrate has always been the problem. If you're just selling it into the Chinese market, they don't pay much, especially if you've got a low quality product. So as I was saying earlier, if we can be selling it into the Western markets as high quality products, as value added products, be it micronized, be it, spheronized or USPG or anything that we can do to bring that value, then it just slowly but surely adds, to our weighted average basket price for everything. And at the moment we're on about, I think, $13.50 for that. And over time, if we put more and more percentage of what we're going to sell into the higher quality and higher value bracket, then that $13.50 becomes $1,500, becomes $1,600, etc. And it can really push up very fast with some of these super high value products that we're looking at selling at the moment. So pricing, I'm going to put a new slide into my latest presentation, and I guess we'll get a copy of that put onto our website. And I've done the new slide tries to show where we're going to be selling different products. I haven't necessarily said to whom, because that's just it's changing all the time. As new off-takers come in, we get a new batting order, we get a new mix, and others sort of slip down the batting order and become less relevant to us. But I've tried to explain the kind of products that we'll be selling, what sort of prices we'll get for it, what sort of percentages of our overall P1 production we'd be selling into each. So look out for that, and I hope that will help a little bit in terms of some of the pricing. But it is a very opaque market. I mean, as I say, we've got different prices for different products that range from 600 to 6,000. It's quite bizarre.
Yeah, you've touched on it there. You've mentioned off-takers. It's something I just wanted to quickly discuss, and your sort of sales pipeline approach, because obviously these are things now you're going to be focusing on, given that, you're advancing the project, forward. Can you just explain how that process is going? And, you're looking at like tier one off-takers here, and what's going to be happening sort of over the next sort of 6 to 12 months with that?
Well, we've got non-binding offtake agreements already for more than 20,000 tons. So we have P1 covered, but it's covered, as I said a moment ago, to the extent that we'll get a weighted average basket price of about $1,350. But at any point, we've got various different discussions going on in different continents, different countries with new off-takers. They generally like our product a lot. And, if a new off-taker comes in that happens to be, the US defense or, a nuclear energy plant or, somewhere in the EU, or a graphene producer, or somebody that's really up at the top end of the curve and is prepared to pay more, we'll do business with them. Certainly until the time that we're locked into binding agreements, we'll continue to evolve our funnel and ensure that we get the best possible mix of what we're going to sell to whom. And that's just a constantly moving target, because even once we lock down in binding agreements, we'll be starting to fill up P2, which is going up to 70,000 tons. So we'll have a whole lot of new work going on there. But it's very interesting, because you literally have some people that want to buy just straight concentrates. You have some people that want to buy more advanced products. You have some people that want to buy very specific niche products. We have a whole range of different things that we're selling. And along the way, we're taking new relationships into play. And as we advance those into, through all their testing, we can bring them in as agreements. And we'll just keep doing that.
I was going to say, the thing you've been doing is you've been validating various off-takers or by giving them your product physically and them using it, right? I think didn't you have some of your graphite used on some NASA rockets or something?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of talk about NASA, and somebody pointed out that maybe I said NASA. So if I did, I apologize. It wasn't NASA. It was another space. There's another space agency over in the States. But, equally important, because the same validation on one rocket works for the others. And I think that, that was a very successful test. And they're obviously taking it from suborbital to orbital as the next phase. There's test work going on there. There's some very, very good results coming out of the Generation 3 lithium-ion battery that Safe Loop are making huge progress on at the moment. And I hope we'll have an announcement to the market on that soon. But that is coming through fantastically. It's got to have a percentage of recycled graphite. It's got to have particular safety issues. And, these are all the new cutting edge, I guess, of what's happening out there. And graphite products that are being used. Every time we go over to the States and go and work with AET, we're finding some really cool stuff that they are working on with people like the Defense Department and other players like that. So, there's just lots and lots of different work going on. I think the best of all for me is that we've got some of the highest quality products. So, whoever's got our product and working with it now or next week or next month, even next year, we generally get a positive response from them. And that allows us then to keep mixing, our overall sales mix, getting it, better and better all the time.
Okay. Now, I've got a couple more questions, and then I would like to open the floor to Q&A, and I have got some pre-submitted questions, should no one be brave enough to ask on the call. So I'm just going to say to listeners, if you want to ask a question, use the request to speak function. I'll see it come up, and I'll obviously allow you to do that when I've completed the last two questions that I'm going to ask Mike about now. So do ask a question and just use that request to speak function. So, okay, Mike, right. So I suspect one of the main reasons, aside of the general update that you've done, that listeners will have joined the call, is the next big milestone, project funding, and specifically P1 production funding to get Orom Cross operational. You've been underway on this for a while now, and I think obviously we, all as investors, would have hoped for a successful announcement by now. But can you explain what has been the response to date and how you see this progressing over the near term?
Yeah, okay, so you're right. We haven't really had a chance to talk about this, so I have to sort of go back a few steps. I mean, when we finished the DFS and I went over to the States in particular, obviously hoping for some good responses. And, we have got good responses. Everybody likes us, they like our project, etc. But the States is very, very involved in, I guess it's being driven a lot more by defense than by, before it was in a more sort of energy transition mode with the previous administration. It's now being driven very much by defense. And so rare earths being top of that pile have taken their place at the top of the table in terms of priority. And that's created, I guess, not a problem for us, but it does knock us down the batting order in terms of, they don't have, untold amounts of people that can work on, hundreds of projects at any one time. So I think there's definitely a bottleneck in the States in terms of, what they can focus on and what they're able to. Having said that, most of the US funding, and in particular the government-involved funding, is debt, and we're not looking for debt for P1 anyway. So it's all about keeping them interested enough for P2 and coming and knocking on that door and getting a good response when we go for the next stage in the ramp-up. But I will say that the response was very good, and I had literally had a couple of very positive meetings that I thought were going to move us to where we wanted to go back in February, and then suddenly these missiles started flying in Iran and in the Gulf, and so that sort of everybody has been sitting on their hands for a couple of months, which doesn't help us, and there's not a lot you can do. We were looking at some Middle East options in terms of funding, some of the Gulf states, and again, to be fair to them, they've got other priorities right now. And, that war has definitely caused some issues for us in terms of timing and some of the parties that we might have wanted to be involved. Having said that, I've got a specific mission. The mission is about getting that P1 production, that $45 million US, because I believe very, very strongly we've got, 4 or 5 debt providers that we can call on for P2 once P1 is up and running. So the key is get P1 up and running, and then I think all of the funding beyond that will look after itself. So we've been focusing on finding particular investors that are interested to participate via equity as opposed to debt.
Right.
And I want to do this equity very much more at the project level rather than rattling the tin in London through the listed company and raising it there. You will obviously notice that we brought on board Cavendish recently, and the idea is to focus on bringing funds and other institutional investors as shareholders over time, so that we can build a much stronger shareholder register that has that institutional support over time. But for this P1 funding, I've been focusing on project, and that requires a lot of finesse, because there's, a certain type of investor that will invest at the project level. And they have to be typically strategic. They have to be in the game. They have to be somehow involved in graphite or in the region, or, other specific things that make it interesting for them, particularly if I'm seeking a much higher valuation for their entry at the project level than would be done if we raised money in London. So where are we? We've had a number of people, in the data room for quite a while. I won't say that all of them are going to be, right there till the end. It's just in the nature of the game that some of them fall out. But I think that we've got enough parties there to cover the requirement that we need. I don't want to have 20 different partners. I want to try and keep it limited down to, 2 or 3 at best. So, we don't have too much to deal with. But I'm confident that we are nearing the end of that process. I can't put timelines on it. I know people are going to ask for exactly when. It's just difficult to do because there's things like the Gulf War has just restarted and missiles are flying again, so that might just create some issues with regards to people being able to travel and go and see things and do what they've got to do. But at the same time, the people that are actually going to invest the money dictate the pace at which they complete their due diligence and make the investment decision. And I can push them and I can prod them and I can work as fast as I possibly can, because it's obviously in my interest to get this done quickly. But ultimately, if I push them too hard, I'm going to push them away. So I guess the answer is that I'm confident we can do it. I'm confident we can get some news to the market pretty soon. Without putting a date on it, I'm talking about near term rather than medium term. And, I think that if we get over the line with what I'm hoping will occur, the market's going to be very excited with what it sees, both in terms of who they are and what sort of valuations we're getting for it. So, it's worth the wait. And I would always say, in a worst case scenario, I think when they put out that research note recently, Cavendish, had to say where we would raise this money in the event of no project investors coming forward. And they said, we'll go out and do a $50 million raise in London. And everybody sort of got up in arms and said, that means that Blencowe are going to go and do it in London. We're not. It's not my intention to do that. If there was a small gap to fill down the line, we'd consider it. But I think there's enough interest at the project level that we can do it with investors coming in, and they'll be investing into the local Ugandan company rather than into Blencowe. So, that would be very good for us. Obviously, less dilution, very strategic partners, without giving who they are away. I think, there's definitely room for, some of the better players that we've been talking to come in and be part of that. And if they do, then I think we're off and away, and we'll get started on trying to build this and get into operations.
Okay, good. And just the last point on the funding then. Blencowe's got a relationship with the DFC, and obviously they gave you the $5 million grant, I believe it was. What role may they play in funding Orom Cross, if any?
Look, DFC have said to me they like us, they like our project, they like our management, they like everything about it. But right now, their primary focus is rare earths. And in graphite, their primary focus is Syra Resources. I think it's public knowledge that they converted, is it 20 or 30 million? I think it's $30 million of their debt into 19.9% of Syra equity. And they've decided that they've got to try and sort out that mess. In my personal opinion, and it's only my opinion, I think that that's a very bad decision. I think they're chasing good money after bad. And at the end of the day, Syra have got some major issues, whether it's their product quality or whether it's their location. It's just not an easy project. And, the DFC have put in $250 million, both in terms of Balama and the anode, facility in the States. And so they felt that they had to go and try and sort this out. And so that's what they're going to do. And that's what they're currently doing. It doesn't affect us because, as I said earlier, we don't need them for this particular phase. But I think that as we go forward and we're looking for phase 2 debt, then I very much want to have them on board. And so, we've maintained good relationships. And, I'll be back there to speak to them. And they've said, please come back. This is not as if we're not going to invest into you. We're just not going to do it right now. And I said, well, I don't want your debt anyway. I'll come talk to you when I'm ready for that. So that's where we sit at them at the moment.
Yeah, so there's an important distinction that some of these players like the DFC or AFC or whatever, they're debt focused, and that's not what your focus is right now. It's about raising the project level potential funds for P1.
Yeah, AFC can do equity as well, and in very particular circumstances, DFC can as well. As I say, they've just converted some of their debt in Syria into equity, but that's because they almost had to, rather than they chose to. But yeah, we are focusing on specific equity participants, and I think that once we've got those over the line, we start to build P1. I think the debt will fall into line very quickly and very easily for P2, and I'll work that while we're building P1. So it's not as if we have to wait until it's built and then start this whole process again.
Yeah.
We can do these things in parallel.
Okay, that's great. Right, great update there, Mike. Thanks. Anyone else who wants to ask a question, use the request to speak function, and I will allow you to be a speaker and ask a question. I've got Al, who I believe wants to ask a question. Al, far away.
Hi, Sponge. Yeah, that'd be great. Afternoon, Mike, as well. It was just a quick one, really, knowing how you know the battery market and graphite. Do you see changes with sort of sodium ion technology coming in affecting what we're doing at all, or will there always be a place for us and graphite?
I don't know about the word always. Always is a very long word in this particular industry. But I definitely think there's going to be graphite used in lithium-ion batteries for the near future and even for the medium term. I mean, even if they did find some other technologies that made more sense, there's going to have to be a whole transition where everybody, including the facilities, get built to manufacture for scale and downstream, etc. So, it's not as if one suddenly says, oh, there's a different technology that works, and then, next year it's all over for graphite. I think that, for me, the next 10 years are pretty solid for lithium-ion batteries and for graphite within those. As I said, always is a difficult one because who knows what can happen after that. But certainly in the near to medium term, I think we're safe.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Al. We don't seem to have any other questions or anyone wanting to ask a question at the moment, but if you do...
Darren, can I just add to Al's question there, because he touched upon something which I didn't mention before, is synthetic. Some people ask that same question about how synthetic plays a role versus natural flake graphite. And, synthetic graphite does have a big role within the anode. And typically I would say 60 to 70% of batteries are manufactured using synthetic graphite. So any growth in our market is, for us, in terms of natural flake, is limited to a smaller percentage of the overall. But having said that, the test work that we've done, or AETC have been doing for us, and proven that our Orom Cross graphite can actually deliver the same performance levels as synthetic graphite. And so the reason why the majority of an anode is synthetic is because it's much more stable in terms of how the current flows. And obviously that stability is something that's very sought after within the battery. But if our natural flake graphite from our project can actually deliver the same quality and the same stability, yet at the same time it can be much cheaper because synthetic is expensive and it is obviously more environmentally friendly, then I think we've got another string to our bow, and I think we've got something that can appeal to the market for that particular reason as well. So I'm quietly confident that we can dig into that synthetic space or that synthetic percentage, and that could be very important for us going forward, because even a small shift in that represents a huge amount of volume that we could move and sell into markets going forward.
Okay, got a question from Jockey. If you want to ask, just unmute yourself.
Hi there, thanks, Sponge.
No worries.
Mike, I had a question for you back on the P1 funding. You mentioned that you were potentially nearing the end of the process, although you didn't want to push the sort of timelines. Have you given an indicative timeline to the people in the data room that you're working to yourselves to try and converge on something?
I have several times, but if they don't keep to it, then I can either, tell them to go and play in the snow, or I can keep working with them. And so, I've chosen the latter. It doesn't mean that this is a never-ending process, by the way. It just means that they're doing a very thorough job, and I don't expect anything less. So the answer is yes, we do give indicative timeframes, and I think what will really help this process is if we bring the first one over the line. If we get a cornerstone that comes in, we announce it to the market, and we've got the first funder on board, then I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on some of the other ones, because if that cornerstone is the party that I'm hoping it will be, it's going to have a huge impact in the market, and it's going to kickstart a lot of those other parties that are sitting on the fence to make a decision quickly, because they'll know that they could be left out if they don't. So I'm kind of working with them all to try and get them to that point where they can make an investment decision quickly, because I know that when the time comes, they're going to need to. And I'm sorry if that's very cryptic, but I just can't mention names at this
No,
stage.
that's okay. Is it not? Maybe I'm being naive here commercially, but is it possible to drive some competitive tension between them? So there's obviously not wanting to actually annoy them, but there's obviously some incentive for one of them to actually come in with us. So I'm just wondering whether or not it is possible to converge on a time scale, because it'll be a mutual interest for the winning partner.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, competitive tension is very good, and we're trying to play that as much as we possibly can. But at the same time, we're also trying to ask investors who are coming in to pay a significant premium over and above our market cap, and so it's a tough ask. I mean, I'm asking for the eggs and the bacon and everything else on the plate, and so. It's trying to do that in a way that people don't feel it's getting shoved in their face, and that they realize that there is value and they want to be part of it. So, it's a very, I don't know, the process is one that has to be taken very delicately and very carefully. Otherwise we could overshoot ourselves, in terms of what we're pushing for, in terms of timing, in terms of value, in terms of everything. And suddenly we don't have anyone and we're back to square one. And that would be, I don't say catastrophic, because I think we could still find funding, but it would certainly take us a few steps backwards. So I want to do it carefully, and I'm prepared to wait a little bit longer to get the right parties on board, which is where I think we're going.
Are there any of those parties actually rely on the Q3 tenders coming in, or is it an entirely independent piece there?
No, they're not relying on it, because we've already said, and they've already done their diligence to prove that we've covered P1 with what we've got already. But they are well aware that some of these tenders, if they come into fruition, can have a very big impact on where we go in the future. So, it'd be naive to say that they wouldn't impact their decision. I'm hoping it will. And I'm hoping that I can get over the line with those quite soon as well, so that we can obviously impact that decision.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jockey. I've got another question from ADP. Fire away.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Mike. You've touched on the Chinese aspect, obviously going non-Chinese route. It clearly is in their interest as well to be, to get hold of someone like a Blencowe. Have you had much interest? Are they cut out of the process, or have you had much interest in terms of?
When you say for them to get involved, are you talking about as an off-taker, as a provider of equipment, or as a shareholder? What are you thinking?
Shareholder and company as a whole, or P1 funding.
Yeah, the Chinese tend to stick with the Chinese mines, and there's a few of them around the place, not just in China, but over Africa, etc. There's a couple down in Tanzania. Look, the Chinese are more, I call it the China bubble and the non-China bubble. And, we're in one and they're in the other. It doesn't mean that they are not aware of who we are and what we've got. We've done a lot of testing, including our bulk sample testing in China. And I'm, 100% sure that all of those results will be in the face of everybody who's got any interest in graphite. So they're there. They'll be looking. But right now, they're not our number one choice, because if I was to go and lob in a Chinese investor into P1 as a shareholder, then I'm probably going to divorce myself from any Western money coming in from certain parties, and maybe even some of the off-takers that I'm looking to bring in as well. So, we have to walk a tightrope. It's a very sort of careful one because, we do need China for certain things, but at the same time, we don't want to be seen as being too close to them in any way. Otherwise, we could find ourselves in hot water with some of for example, DFC won't come and debt fund a project if it's got Chinese investors. So we'd be finding ourselves, out of that particular angle very quickly if we took on Chinese investors at this stage.
Wonderful. Thank you. Understood. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, ADP. Okay, so last chance really for anyone to request to speak and ask a question. I've got a submitted question here. We're sort of running towards the end of the space anyway, so Mike, in the meantime, unless someone else turns up, I've got a question. What is the critical path for 2027 first production requiring, I assume, equipment orders by around mid 2026, 27 production? Is it still realistic, or should shareholders now be planning for around 2028?
Yeah, it's a good question. The longer this delays, the more unlikely it becomes. But my COO is telling me and continuously telling me that from the date of funding being available, we can have this ordered and built and shipped and built in 9 months, which I tend to think is more like 12 because I'm a bit more conservative in that. But if we do get everything done and dusted in this final quarter of this year, or by the final quarter, then if that 12 months kicks through, we can be producing in the final quarter of next year. Does that mean that we're obviously going to be ramping up P1 into 2028? Yes, it does. This is a process. You don't just turn everything on and go full steam on day one. So for me, it's very important that we have production start in 2027. That's our goal. And I would like to see it, as soon into 2027 as possible. But yeah, it's all about when I can get this money in, and obviously when we can start using that money to order the equipment and start building.
Yeah. Okay. Another one here then, probably make this the last one, unless anyone wants to ask a question. Without naming the SPG partner, can you confirm whether they are also a participant in the P1 equity discussions, given their commercial interest in Orom Cross concentrate and feedstock?
Well, we don't have an SPG partner anymore. The
Right.
Chinese partner that we were going to develop along a JV sort of scenario,
Yeah.
we've decided to walk away from that. I thought we had made that quite clear.
Right.
For the reasons that I mentioned before, that if we have, involvement from China, it's just going to literally cut off any avenues of certainly US, but other Western funding. So we took a path, quite a long way back, which said, let's go and do this ourselves, which then sort of pushed us closer into the relationships with the likes of AET, Alchemia, and other parties. We've got several others that we're talking to as well. And I'm quite happy with that. I think that if we take this slowly and steadily rather than rush it, we can learn this trade and we can deliver the beneficiated products on our own. But certainly to start off with, we're going to be relying on some of the help from those parties, those whole treatment facilities that they have. And, over time, I think we'll, have a better commercial outcome if we do it ourselves. And certainly we have the latitude to be able to bring in different relationships that, as I said before, will be divorced very quickly if we announce a Chinese partnership. So definitely that partner that we spoke to is still very interested. They would like to buy products from us. They're a very respectable organization, and they, do a heck of a lot of the purification in the world today. So, in time, I would like to be able to sell them some product, but, it's all about commercial arrangements. It's about the politics of what's going on at the time and who's funded us. And at the end of the day, they are not going to be a funder of P1. No.
Okay. Obviously you've done a lot of work with AET, haven't you, testing wise? We've seen a few RNSs about test work they've done. So it sounds like that relationship's now sort of progressing.
Yeah, it's been a great one. I mean, I think they're some of the smartest people I've ever met. What they haven't worked out in graphite, no one else has. I mean, they really are, cutting edge, and it's great to go and see them and do stuff with them. And I think it's going to evolve exponentially once they see that we're moving into production, because, they've heard this 1,000 times from other peers of ours, all saying they're going to be in production, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and they never get anywhere. So, like all the off-takers, the likes of AET and Alchemia will evolve to something bigger and better once we get funded, once we start building and say we're actually doing it. And I think it could go places. I think these are great organizations. One is, a very, very solid in the US space, and the other one's very solid in the European Union. So they have off-takers coming to them all the time looking for product, and we've got some of the best quality products, so obviously they pass them on to us. So yeah, let's just see where it goes. But for now, great relationships, and of course AET are our link into Safe Loop, and that's going to be a huge off-taker for us in time. And we want to keep working with them on that particular project as well. So there's lots happening, and I reckon there's going to be a whole lot more, once we get past the tipping point and start producing.
Yeah, I was just going to close with really, Mike, perhaps you could just give us what your thoughts are on, the remainder of 2026 and going into 2027. What do you think the key milestones are that you're looking to achieve?
Well, I think there are a couple of big tenders that we're in at the moment, and we have been in for a while. I think if we can get over the line with those, they will be huge. And there's a lot of other off-takers, including Safe Loop, that we've got good announcements coming into the market. But, the one that really matters to the market and I guess to us is getting the funding over the line and getting it locked in as quickly as we can. So there's some certainty around production. And then I think, even more off-takers are going to come to us anyway, so it obviously helps. But, these are the lines in the sand for sure. And, those are the ones we're working on day by day. Make no mistake. I came off a call an hour before this call with one of those parties, just trying to cover some of their final questions and make sure that they're ready to go and, make their own investment decisions as well. So we're working on it day by day. And, hopefully we can announce something quite soon, which will be fantastic for everyone involved.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mike, thanks for another great update and your usual sort of open and honest, responses to questions and what have you. I think it's quite refreshing. We'll look forward to hopefully seeing some of these milestones, across the remainder of 2026. And obviously a few of those are potentially transformational. So thanks very much for your time today. Thanks for everyone.
No, it's a pleasure, Darren. And look, I just want to say thanks to, obviously there's a lot of people listening in. I appreciate people take their time. I'm hoping some of these things happen a so referring to a lot more early near term than that. But keep watching. There's plenty stuff that's going to come out soon is absolutely transformational for us. So with a bit of luck, I get it over the line, and then we're off and we're off to the races and get this thing built.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's fate, but you started to go robotic and dropping in and out then. So I think the gods were with us on this one. So anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike. And we look forward to chatting again soon.
Okay. Take care. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks.
Bye.